Hey everybody, I'm Scott Nyborg. Thanks for being part of Groundbreak and thanks for joining us for this session. Today, we're going to stand in the shoes of the construction project owner and try to understand how they think and what matters to them.
And I'm Zachary Stavis. If you work for a general contractor or a specialty contractor, or even another stakeholder on the project team, and you want to build a better understanding of the company paying your bill, you're in the right place. This should also be helpful if you work for an owner directly, but you're kind of new to that relationship. I'm the Senior Manager of Product Marketing for Owners here at Procore. One of the reasons I joined the team is because I'm passionate about uniting everyone in the industry on a common platform and using that as a vehicle to improve the whole industry. Too often, owners are seen by the rest of the industry as just those folks on the other side of the table. But successful project owners see that all of the stakeholders, including the owner, are their collaborators and their allies. And that prospect of helping support those relationships is really exciting to me.
And I'm Senior Trainer on the construction education team at Procore. You know, not too far back, I was working as head of pre-construction for a general contractor, and we were in a CMAR relationship with a private boarding school looking to build a new student center. The project was way over budget, and we knew the problem was that the school board was very attached to some design features that were driving the price way up. So we were braced for a bad meeting. But because we understood the school as the project owner, we were able to deliver that bad news along with some laser-focused solutions and also some real talk about why the school needed to reconsider its budget. It turned out to be a great meeting. And in the end, a discussion that we thought might kill the project actually turned out really good for our business. The project had just become a lot larger.
To me, that's what this session's all about. To understand the owner well enough to turn bad news into good outcomes, we first need to really understand what an owner is and identify the different types of firms and organizations that play this role. Then we'll look at the owner's priorities. What keeps them up at night and what do they care about? And finally, we'll look at how to meet those challenges. We'll see how a construction management platform like Procore can address many of those issues, but even more importantly, we'll look at how you and your companies can provide services that get the crux of the owner's pain.
We developed a self-paced course at Procore called Intro to Owners. It was originally targeted at our internal team, the idea being to help ensure that everybody working at Procore understands this really critical industry stakeholder. But today, I'm really happy to announce that we're making the course available to all of you as well. It's a 6-part course, about 2 hours of content, and it's completely free. So you can think of today's session as a sneak peek. See the session notes for information on how to access the content, and we'd love to hear what you think after you go through it.
All right, let's get right into it. We should start with the definition so we're all really clear on what we mean when we say owner. Our definition is really simple. If you commission the project and you're paying for it, you're the owner. When I say commission, what I mean is that the owner is the party that sets the project into motion. We do construction projects because they solve someone's business or organizational need, and that somebody is the owner. In fact, a successful construction project is only successful because it addresses the owner's need. So in that moment of inception, when the owner decides to do a project, they're responsible for the whole thing, full stop. The rest of us get involved when the owner makes a business decision to delegate some of the responsibilities. In other words, to pay someone to help them out.
Okay, so quick side note. You've probably heard and used the term commissioning or CX, and that's not exactly what we mean. Commissioning is the process of testing and verifying and tuning the building systems before we turn over the project. Here, we're using the word commissions to refer to the fact that the owner puts the whole project into motion. Okay, the other part of this definition is the pays for part, and we mean this really broadly. It's not at all unusual for owners to leverage external funds to pay for construction. This is the proverbial OPM, or other people's money. Owners don't often pay for their projects out of pocket. Instead, the owner brings together funds from investors, lenders, the public, or whatever other means. And the owner is responsible for allocating those funds as required to get the project done. So starting with that as a definition, we can see that there's a huge diversity of companies and organizations that can be owners.
That's exactly right. When we think about other construction stakeholders, they tend to kind of fit a single mold. For example, when you consider GCs as a class of business, they probably all have a lot more in common than they have differences. But that's not so with owners. They can be as different from one another as night and day. So let's try to get our arms around that by creating a whole taxonomy of owners.
So we'll start really simple. We'll divide the universe of owners into the private sector and the public sector. What's the difference? Well, the public sector is basically the part of the economy that's controlled by government and fueled by public money. In other words, your tax dollars. The private sector is just the opposite, and we'll start here first and differentiate between real estate owners and all of the other businesses out there. Let's just call them corporations. The distinction that we're really making here is between companies that use real estate along the way to fulfilling their business purpose and companies whose entire business model is to rent or sell that real estate to others. So we'll say more about this in a second. Hang in there.
Let's start with that public sector bucket, where we've got the government as well as entities that are purely governmental funded. Simple enough? Well, not always. I want to call out one more group of owners that we'll call civic services. I'm talking about segments like healthcare, education, energy, and utilities. These deserve their own category for a couple of key reasons. They're a mixed bag as to whether they fit in the private or public sector. Let's take education in the United States. We have both public and private school systems, and they have some pretty unique needs as well.
So let's use these 4 categories, not 2, as our model for segmenting the world of owners. Now listen, it's just a model and it's not perfect, but at Procore, we found this to be a pretty helpful way of looking at the spectrum of owners. So we're going to see a couple of examples. An easy example of the private sector corporation is the company that Zach and I work for, Procore. Procore makes money by making software, and the need to deal with real estate or to do construction is nothing more than a side effect of our core work. This is a picture of the office where I sit, or at least where I used to sit before COVID. When I took this picture, Procore was in the middle of a TI project to make extra room for our growing team. The decision to do this project isn't really any different than other cost of business choices. So for example, should we buy laptops for our people? Sure, that would probably help them write some code. Should we pay the electrical bill? Sure, keeping the lights on would probably also help folks be effective. Now, should we build this office space so that it's a functional and effective place to work? Sure. Aha, Procore just commissioned a construction project. Procore is the project owner.
Now, one important note, we don't actually own the building as Procore, we lease it. Might seem strange that Procore is willing to pay for a project which ostensibly improves the building when we don't own that asset, but this is really common. And it's an important takeaway. When we think about our definition of the project owner, it doesn't say anything about whether the entity in question actually holds title to the land or the building where the project takes place, because not all project owners actually own any real estate.
Okay, so if we compare those corporations to public sector owners, we find that there's a lot more in common than you might think. Government agencies have a core purpose just like private companies do. It's just that their purpose is to serve the public good instead of to turn a profit. They still make very business-driven decisions about how to use real estate in the pursuit of that purpose. And in that way, they're a lot like private companies.
One key difference between private sector and governmental owners is that the government pays for projects with public money. So, as many of you know from quite a lot of experience, working on a public project often means adhering to additional requirements around financial tracking, insurance bonding, and so on. But those requirements aren't just to make things painful for you. The owner has responsibilities to its constituents around protecting their investments. Your participation in those processes helps the owner address some of its own imperatives.
Now, real estate owners are part of the private sector, but they're a bit of a different animal because real estate and construction are at the very center of their business. There's basically 2 ways that you can use real estate to generate revenue. You can either buy real estate at one price and sell it at another, and hopefully that sell price is higher and you make some money. Or you can hold real estate and rent it to others. Either way, construction is a key tool for ensuring that the real estate asset is able to generate the revenue that this owner counts on.
Let's go back to that 4th type of owners, or civic services. For example, where I live, my water utility is a governmental agency, but the electrical utility is an investor-owned corporation. Regardless of whether these owners are private or public, the services they provide are of fundamental importance to the general public. As a result, there tends to be a lot of regulation in this sector. And that regulation becomes a key dynamic in construction projects pursued by these owners, as I bet many of you can attest. So look, that was a lot of examples, but I hope your takeaway is that owners come in many different flavors. For the rest of this session, we want to talk about owners' pain points and priorities. When you realize how many different kinds of owners there are, it might be hard to say that they all care about any one thing, but actually there's a lot of really important common ground. And to get right to it, let me borrow a phrase from the author Stephen Covey. He uses the phrase circle of concern, and it's a great term for us to adapt because it evokes the idea that you can draw a boundary between the stuff that matters to you and the stuff that doesn't. And that's a very interesting and important concept for us in construction, where project outcomes hinge on the successful collaboration of lots of different stakeholders, all of whom have different circles of concern. There's overlap, sure, between what a GC, a specialty contractor, an architect, or the owner cares about. I mean, everyone wants the project to be a success, but how they define that success varies. So our goal is to better understand the owner's circle of concern. Strangely enough, it's helpful to start by thinking about some of the other team members first.
So let's think about a single construction project in isolation. Here's a picture of your typical project lifecycle. And I want to look at the engagement or the involvement of various project team members in this process. We'll start with the example of the architect because their role is super clear-cut. This orange bar is meant to indicate the period of time during which the architect is actually executing on their scope of work, which of course includes designing the project and supporting the construction team as they make that design into a reality. Now, scope of work is not necessarily the same as circle of concern. What the architect cares about is almost certainly more broad than what they are directly responsible for. And if you were to graph the architect's level of concern over time, it would probably look something like this.
Many of you, of course, are not architects, but you're GCs and specialty contractors. And I'm sure you'd say a similar thing about your scopes of work and your areas of concern. You care, of course, whether the design or planning of a project goes well. I don't need to tell you that a crummy design makes your lives really miserable, but you're not responsible for the design. You have a different level of interest in the design phase than that architect does. But even more important, the concerns of pretty much every actor on the project except the owner are encapsulated within the project itself. There's no point prior to the inception of the project, nor after its conclusion, where the GC, for example, says, I have a significant business interest in what's going on with this asset. And that means the boundaries of the circles of concern for everyone here roughly maps with the beginning and end of the project.
But the owner simply can't think like that. As we look at this project, we see that the owner's involvement kind of runs off both ends of the slide. The owner's circle of concern is not bound by the project. Why? Well, first of all, the owner's motivation for the project came out of some business need. So the project fits into a larger context of what the owner is trying to accomplish. The other thing is, the owner is going to be stuck with the outcome of the project. Only the owner is so exposed to the operational risk associated with the finished product. So imagine we do this beautiful TI job. Everything's perfect, but the HVAC is imbalanced and part of the office is freezing cold. Now the HVAC trade may get a call back for sure, but only the owner feels the pain of reduced productivity because workers seated in that area keep leaving their desks to go warm up.
So let's start with the subset of the owner's circle of concern that are encapsulated within that single project. The very basics of effective construction management, like staying on time and on budget, are often obstructed by traditional processes. And sure, we all care about staying on time and we all care about staying on budget. But at the end of the day, those are risks that accrue to the owner. If the job shuts down for 2 weeks because of bad weather, it sucks for all of us, but the owner literally pays for it. Where there are blockers to effective collaboration, the owner feels that pain a lot more acutely because the owner suffers from the faulty outcomes. When other stakeholders experience something as cumbersome, the owner often experiences it as expensive. These are the core problems that Procore was created to solve. And Procore helps by providing a really mature and robust construction management toolset and by connecting everyone in the industry on a single platform. In fact, that's basically our mission statement. So at this level alone, Procore can do a lot for owners.
But look, technology can't solve all these problems by itself. You're in a position to shape the construction services that you provide to meet the owner's pains. So for example, when you communicate early, often, and with crystal clarity about things that threaten budget and schedule, you become the owner's indispensable lens into future risk. If you're part of the construction team, there are plenty of incentives, either real or perceived, to spin bad news and keep the owner happy in the short term. But owners are sophisticated businesses and they're used to dealing with risk. They can take bad news. It's way more valuable to the owner that you be straight about reality. And if you really want to add value, pair that unflinching transparency with solution proposals. That 2-week schedule bust is sure to be unwelcome news to the owner, and I get it. But if you air it out and provide your thoughts on how that time might be recovered, you've stepped out in front of the owner's pain and you've become an ally to solving the problem.
To our earlier point, the owner's pain do not stop at the boundary of a project. In fact, the owner must look across the entire term of ownership or lease of the asset. it's entirely likely that the owner will commission multiple projects over that term. Imagine a real estate owner-operator who at some point during the ownership of a building might upgrade the lobby, replace the HVAC system, update the plaza outside, paint the building, fix a leaky pipe, replace the common area carpets, and let's say maybe add shade devices to the exterior for energy efficiency. That means it's important to coordinate financials across all of those projects. They all impact the overall performance of the asset over time. And each project consumes capital and changes the cost picture with respect to that asset. You can see in this context, the owner will likely make decisions it might otherwise not if it only had one project to worry about. But here's the thing. Traditionally, software hasn't served the owner well for this purpose. Project management and project information was stored in discrete data silos. What do I mean by a data silo? Well, imagine an owner who runs 40 different projects at once. These projects might be spread out across 15 or 20 different GCs and maybe 80 different specialty contractors. And if, as one of those GCs, you want the data that you provide in your project to be as useful as possible for the owner, it needs to be stored in the same place and organized in the same way as all of the data from all of those other GCs and all of those other projects. Otherwise, it's somewhere between impossible and just intensely painful for the owner to look across data from multiple projects and draw any kind of conclusion at all.
So time can also create data silos. In fact, if you think about it, the owner loses access to most project information when the project ends. Sure, you put together your closeout package and you put together your operation manual, but you're probably walking away from the project with far more information than you're leaving behind. And that's all fundamentally problematic if you're the owner trying to manage an asset by looking across projects. Procore helps enormously with these issues. It brings all project data together in one place, and it enforces regularity from project to project, even when different teams are working on them. And Procore makes it possible for data to live on with the owner after the rest of the project team has departed the scene.
That's exactly right. And by leveraging a platform like Procore, but also just by thoughtfully managing your behavior and standards around project data, you can help the owner give these pains a real punch in the mouth. Aside from the completed project itself, the data you leave the owner with is probably the most valuable thing that you give them. So the effort that you put into persistent, regular, complete, and detailed records is a value add service of serious note. And the more fully you engage with and align with the owner's data standards, the more fully you empower them to succeed in the operation of an asset after the project's ended. And when you do that, you can be pretty dang sure you'll be top of mind for their next project.
You know, at the last shop that I worked at, we used to say that the owner's last experience with the project was their whole experience with the project. So an otherwise flawless project with a crummy paint job is, you guessed it, a crummy project. So thinking about project data as a value add leave behind for the owner is exactly the same kind of thing. The owner will leverage that data over and over again in the future as they continue to operate the asset. Their interaction with that data will become their final experience with your work product. So what do you want that experience to be like? Do you want them to light up because your data is empowering them to easily make smart decisions? Or do you want them to curse your name because they can't find the information that they need?
And beyond that project or that asset, there's an even broader circle of concern for the owner, and that's the whole portfolio. Most owners manage multiple assets, each with multiple projects, and the performance of that whole portfolio is a key concern. And by that, I mean, how effective is that portfolio in turning the owner's total capital investment into something of value, whether that is enablement of the owner's staff to perform the work that creates revenue, like for a corporate owner, or to create revenue directly, like for a real estate owner. And unless that owner can see the whole picture of all projects across all assets, they can't forecast accurately or intelligently. The transparency and visibility problems that we've examined cascade up to the portfolio level. It's the same set of issues, just a lot more zeros after the dollar signs. If the owner doesn't have visibility into accurate and current status of their projects, they can't forecast with confidence. And shaky forecasting, combined with these collaborative blockers we've already talked about, makes for a really inefficient deployment of capital. What I mean is, when the owner puts money towards a purpose, that investment may or may not translate well into their intended outcome.
So again, both Procore and all of you can help. We've just talked about how Procore unites all project data in a single system of record and ensures that the data is current with on-the-ground developments. Because of this, the owner is able to develop forecasts that are based on real facts and the facts of today, not last month's billing cycle. Forecasting can be dynamic, moving and flexing with the real life changes on the ground, instead of being stuck in time because it's too much work to manually update some spreadsheet. With that powerful forecasting and with construction management tools that empower the project team to act as a unit, deployment of capital becomes really efficient. And now the owner can make smart decisions about how to spend money and then actually get those decisions translated into action on the ground, which of course is where you step into the picture. Forecasting is another place where you can do a greater service to the owner by just being straight with them. Accuracy and truth are far more valuable than spin because it means that the owner can steer the strategy for the whole portfolio in possession of real life facts. In other words, don't create a surprise for the owner when in fact you're able to help them see it coming. And remember, historically, it's actually been quite hard for owners to translate strategic decision-making into outcomes. Sure, Procore provides lots of great collaboration tools, but somebody has got to actually use them. And you're the real solution here. Make sure that your company is part of the conduit for the owner's need and intent to be understood by the entire team. Seek to understand that intent and then broadcast it clearly and often to the rest of the team.
Our industry has a long history of getting things done through adversarial working relationships. There's a lot of inertia to overcome there. But we know now that collaborative approaches built on trust and alignment are a lot more effective. There's a reason that design build is rapidly eclipsing traditional design bid build as the most used project delivery method. By being open to more collaborative contracting models like design build or integrated project delivery or IPD, these create a more unified project team, and that gets the crux of the owner's pain around inefficient capital deployment.
So here's the big takeaway. The owner's concern is far more broad than any single project. Whereas the rest of us get to finish the project and move on, the owner is stuck with the project outcome for the long haul. And that outcome affects how the asset and how the entire portfolio will perform. What's cool is that you're all in a position to make sure that that outcome is really positive. Using a construction management platform like Procore is a huge step, but at the end of the day, the most important thing you can do is to produce your work in a way that serves the broader context of the owner's circle of concern.
Let's also be clear that when we recommend that you help the owner, we're not suggesting you do it as a charity. When you show up as the owner's most effective resource in tackling these issues, you can be guaranteed it'll be good for your business, because ultimately you'll be top of mind for the next project, and word of that kind of performance will definitely get around to other owners as well. Of course, none of that is to displace the owner's responsibility to run their own business. What does that really look like? What do the owners do all day? Their to-do lists are as long as your arm, really. But let's take a quick look at some key responsibilities in the context of these three layers of the owner's circle of concern. Let's start with the portfolio, which is the 50,000-foot view for the owner. This is the level of big strategic goals. Of course, the first thing you have to do with goals is to set them. So the owner has to set the performance targets for their entire portfolio and then create a plan to make it happen. So-called capital planning is not a one-and-done exercise. It's a dynamic process in which the owner is constantly adjusting to changing conditions in their market and in their portfolio. With a plan in place, the owner has to source the capital to enable that plan. Remember, even though owners pay for their own construction projects, they often do that with funds they've brought together from other sources. This can come in the form of investments, of lending, or public funds. Finding and gaining access to that money is a big part of their job.
Okay, so at the asset level, the owner's focus is a little more granular. Operations and maintenance of the asset is something that any owner has to deal with, though what that looks like could vary widely depending on what the owner is and what the asset is. And though we might think of construction as a more discretionary activity than O&M, it's really not that optional. Capital improvements, which is the term used by owners for construction relating to existing assets, is a difficult responsibility to escape. No building in the world gets built only once. Every asset generates a string of construction projects over time. Even a grass hut periodically needs a new roof. And I'm being a little silly, but you take my point. By the way, if every asset is a string of construction projects, that means that no matter what you're working on, you know that some other construction team is going to follow yours. Your colleagues, either at your own company or out there in the broader industry, are going to follow your work. The quality of the project data that you leave the owner with benefits these future teams as well. So hey, pay it forward, right? Now, for the owner, maintenance and construction are about protecting and improving the value of the asset. both its value to the wider marketplace and its efficacy in meeting the business needs of the owner.
All right, so let's dive one level deeper to the project level. The owner has a lot of unique responsibilities here. Formulating project requirements, shaping the team, selecting a delivery method, we could go on. But one really essential responsibility is managing risk. No project is immune to change, no matter how carefully planned. And when change shows up, the project team can only go so far as to scope out and propose solutions. Only the owner can make the final call on what to do. The owner also has the responsibility, either explicit or implicit, to accept completed work on the part of the whole project. If nothing else, the owner implicitly agrees that the job is acceptable when it pays its bills. Because of that, an important activity for the owner is the valuation of finished work against the requirements they originally stated. And though it might go without saying, only the owner can accept a finished project and bring the construction phase to a conclusion.
So let's land it here. What we've been doing today is trying to see the world through the eyes of the owner. To understand what they do all day and what keeps them up at night, we've developed a framework of 3 circles of concern: the project, the asset, and the portfolio. And we've studied some of the pain points that owners experience at each of these levels. Hopefully, you're walking away with a key insight that every project fits into a much broader context for the owner. And when you understand that context and you can connect your work on the project that you're working on back to the bigger priorities for the owner, that will set you and your firm apart in a big way.
Thank you very much for spending the last half hour with us. If you want to learn more, don't forget to check out our free Intro to Owners course online and see the session notes for a link. We'd love to hear what you think about it.
And hey, we also want to say thanks to everything you're doing for our industry and for our communities. Please stay safe out there.
Thanks, everyone.